Siegfried's dash attack has seen several changes to it, namely on the second hit of it. While the first hit is unchanged, you always are going to get the second hit to come on out, and while it's possible to make the first hit whiff, you're not ever going to make the second hit whiff. So let's talk about the changes. For starters, using the dash heavy attack largely relied on making the first hit whiff as it causes the opponent to be launched. Afterwards, then, you were basically given a soft knockdown situation where you're able to run your offense. Ideally, you want to space it out so that the second hit would catch the opponent and force them to fall. From there, you had some very simple conversions that you can get, nothing too crazy. At these ranges, you'd be -8 on block. If you're able to properly space this out, you'd be relatively safe, but still at risk to get some counter pokes back on you to punish you. Now for the changes themselves. The second hit comes out 5 frames faster, so instead of being 25 frames on startup, it's now 20. Your travel speed is adjusted, so you're able to cross the distance easier and make it so that you're more likely to hit the opponent with this second hit. The pushback has been reduced, and Siegfried also comes to a stop more slowly. All of this is to make it so that he's in position to link a close medium slash, whereas before, you would likely just get a far medium slash. Honestly, it's an appreciated buff for him. This normal already had to compete with his dash light and his dash medium attacks, both of which were phenomenal buttons in their own classes. But dash H always kind of lagged behind, especially in terms of the risk-reward that he had. Now, the reward is far more skewed in his favor, and I imagine that Siegfried players are going to be happy spamming this move for the next weeks as they're trying to get comfortable with it. Let's get into his medium fireball, Nelanav. The startup has been reduced by 9 frames, so it comes out in 31 frames instead of 40. This means it's far more viable for him to set this up in neutral to try and control some of the ground space with it. To compensate, the vertical height has been reduced so that it's easier for the opponent to jump over. That's simply a normal jump. Let's compare that to the behavior before. The slower startup and the height is certainly noticeable for Siegfried in the previous patch. While the faster startup is appreciated, the loss of height in the projectile is certainly noticeable. Depending on the timing, you could catch an opponent at the very tip of the jump arc for their normal jumps overall. This made it so that Siegfried had an easier time approaching with these fireball overall. In return for its more applicable nature in neutral, being able to throw it out at closer ranges, it does lose some of that ability to control the skies. Not that he's going to mind it too much, he has some phenomenal anti-air buttons. On to what is arguably the largest nerf to Siegfried in this patch, changes to his heavy fireball. The slow-moving fireball with a tall hitbox was able to basically control the entire neutral screen for 61 frames. Siegfried got everything off of this move. Plus frames up close, the ability to approach with the opponent being able to really contest it outside of like overpowering it with a more powerful fireball. It was pretty much a fantastic option. Additionally, in combos, it was a great tool for him to extend as it left the opponent grounded. If he had this fireball up and he was able to start a triple attack sequence on you, he would usually spend his first special move on that fireball to keep you grounded and avoid stacking up combo limit for as long as he could. The active frames of the heavy fireball have been gutted. Instead of being 61 active frames, it's now down to 26. To compensate, the travel speed has been increased so that it's able to cover the same amount of ground, or at least comparable. As you can see, it's not quite a full-screen fireball anymore. This is a massive nerf to Siegfried in his neutral. Again, he's not able to drop this EX fireball and then just immediately advance in on the opponent with the threat of it lurking in the distance, as it was very hard for many characters to do anything about this approach. Now his fireball is a little more normalized. Additionally, the third hit of the fireball now launches a grounded opponent. That's pretty much what his mid-screen combos using this look like now. It's a massive loss in damage for him, both in the corner and in mid-screen. To compensate for this, the block stun has been increased, so now the frame advantage is +12 instead of +4. I'm not sure if this is really a practical nerf for his pressure so far speaking. It does mean that instead of getting auto-time normals to frame trap here, he now has to do manual delays to get the same frame traps as he could before. For neutral, it does help him out approach the enemy, as if he's able to make them block, he can cover some of the ground with the increased block stun. To compensate for these nerfs of the heavy fireball, his ultimate fireball sees a couple of improvements. In mid-screen, you basically got a hard knockdown with this fireball tool. In the corner, you're given a wall bounce that you could combo off of. However, before, you only got the wall bounce if you got the sword hit to connect. You simply got a knockdown with the fireball before. The sword hit of this fireball launches the opponent higher, meaning that you're able to connect in the corner and get better links from farther range. It's a nice little bit of combo utility for him to apply. But now when you're near the corner, the fireball will give you a wall bounce, regardless of whether or not you had the sword hit. This opens up opportunities for him to get links off of this where he didn't get before near the corner. It's a small buff, but he'll appreciate it. His medium and heavy DP see a couple of nerfs as well to their forward momentum. Siegfried was gifted in that he could basically threaten DPs at ranges other characters couldn't, and so if the opponent was trying to poke from afar and Siegfried had a read, he could throw these out to harass them pretty much. This is what the old range looked like. The DPs also saw a couple of other adjustments, namely to how their first and second hit knockback works. They made it so that it's harder for these moves to whiff in the middle of the skill. Additionally, the heavy version's first hit is now unrecoverable, so in cases where you only get the first hit and somehow whiff the rest of it, the opponent is no longer going to be able to recover and punish you for hitting a DP but not being able to complete it for crazy circumstances. His backlight special, Verran, has a startup reduction. Before it was at 19 frames, which means you couldn't combo into it from a crouch medium. And now he can. He'll appreciate this. Poking out with his crouch medium has always been a bit of a bread and butter tool, and now being able to get a short combo with this on hit is also appreciated, especially considering the changes to his EX Fireball. Without this single frame of difference, Siegfried would not be able to combo anything after the crouching medium link from the EX Fireball. Except, of course, for the EX version, but then you're spending an EX cooldown to get this knockdown before. Siegfried appreciates being able to save another EX cooldown to complete a combo when he uses the fireball now. From his light and medium Orchron stance, Deliverance, his command throw follow-up, has its travel speed and distance increased. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now. He's able to threaten this option from 3 backdash spaces away, which is pretty impressive. You'll note that at point-blank range, it doesn't change the amount of frames it takes for it to connect. It's still 26-frame startup. From my testing, it doesn't seem like the speed of this now also affects other situations that you could find. He's still very much the same amount of negative here. More impressively, the heavy version of Deliverance sees the same buff while also having its startup speed reduced by 3 frames. It now connects on frame 23. This is still at the reactable marker for players, but it is on the trickier side of it at the very least. Additionally, you can now combo into this version of Deliverance, meaning that Siegfried has other ways of ending his combos now. It's a pretty cool change, but we'll see if this actually affects the way he wants to route overall. If you use Orchron to launch your opponent, you don't get the command throw to hit. A practical application of this is when you get an anti-air with a non-counter hit 2H. Siegfried is able to push the opponent to the edge of the wall, but not past that one. Still, it does give him a bit of guaranteed corner carry that he can go for. His 5U, Manigance, had its startup reduced by 3 frames. Before, you weren't able to link it off of an airborne opponent with a 5L. Now you're able to link it against an airborne opponent in the corner off of a 5L. This is nice for him to get easier access to adding stacks to his damage to raise it overall. However, as another nerf, Manigance stacks no longer buff the damage of his throws, raging strikes, raging chains, and brave counters. As you can see, at every level, throws did the same amount of 2,500 damage, the basic damage for a normal throw in this game. This is a big nerf to his overall pressure games because he got higher reward than other characters by going into the stacks and being able to threaten strike throw, with a throw being far more rewarding than what other characters could ask for. Now, it's been normalized, and his damage is going to have to come from the combos he's going to be able to do with these stacks. The combination of these nerfs basically means that Manigance stacks are there to make up for the damage that Siegfried is losing from his nerf combo routes overall. Before, he was able to get higher than average rewards with the system mechanics that nobody else really had access to, and now that that's been normalized, I think Siegfried's going to find himself being a more of an average damage character than an unusually high damage character that he was before. His Skybound art, Schwartz Fang, had its recovery increased by 12 frames, so instead of being negative 18 on block, it's now negative 30. Effectively, it's a build-your-own-punish situation if you're able to block against this super. With a great super like Schwartz Fang, you rarely saw Siegfried players go for his Blood of the Dragon install super. So, various buffs have been made to it to try to make it more appealing for Siegfried. Before, it would always take 50% of your HP, not fill up your SBA gauge, and you were under penalty for 5 seconds.
Great.
Now, it no longer reduces your HP below 20%. So if you're at 30%, you're only going to give up 10% of your HP. Additionally, you also see that the SBA gauge now feels proportionate to the amount of health that you spend. If you're somehow in this situation and you're working on a perfect, you can spend half of your HP to get half of your bar back. Additionally, the Skybound art gauge penalty now only lasts for a single second instead of 300. There might actually be some potential use for this as a comeback mechanic. The damage buffs from Blood of the Dragon have been completely reworked. Before, your normals didn't receive any buff. Your skills did about an extra 100 damage per hit. And it's not even worth mentioning any bonus to supers because odds are if you committed to this super late in the round, you weren't going to be seeing another use of Skybound again, considering that you didn't get a refund for the health spent. Now, pretty much everything gets buffed. Your normal attacks do an extra 10% damage. Skills will do an extra 20% damage. And your Skybound art and Super Skybound art now do an extra 50% damage. Throws, Raging Strikes, Raging Chains, and Brave counters no longer receive the damage buff, though. So again, it's in line with other changes we've seen to Siegfried. While all of these buffs to Blood of the Dragon are cool, I don't see them being used just because Schwartz Fang's utility hasn't been touched at all. While it is more punishable on block, a good Siegfried player is going to save that super for that perfect moment when the opponent finally commits to an option that can be completely blown up by it. This is still a great Skybound art for blowing up fireballs, with normals, anything like that, and shutting down your opponent's ability to throw anything out of neutral is massive. Spending that opportunity on just consuming your elf for a gimmicky super and amplifying your damage when you could just do a flat amount of damage and stop the opponent from committing to anything, I don't think that's a trade that most high-level Siegfried players are still going to make. I think until Schwartz Fang itself has its utility as a whiff punish tool nerfed, no one's going to mess around with Blood of the Dragon. Of all the characters in the patch, it feels like Siegfried is one of the most nerfed characters. Leading up to this point, many people looked at him as one of the best characters in the game, and one that was constantly avoiding the nerf hammer overall, as opposed to someone like Nier, who is constantly getting these little taps over the nerf hammer. Now, it seems like it's finally caught up to Siegfried here. He's lost a lot of his neutral advantage with the changes to his heavy fireball. He's going to be losing out plenty of damage, not only from the system mechanic changes, but his inability now to buff the damage of his own interactions with the system mechanics. He's going to be far more in line with other of the classic standard Shoto-style characters in the game in terms of his damage output overall. And while he does have a couple of nice compensation buffs, make no mistake, he is a worse character in this patch, but I don't think a bad one. He's simply going to be a little more normalized, and for Siegfried players before, they're definitely going to be feeling and appreciating these nerfs, but I think he's just now more in line with the cast. I don't think he's going to be in the top 5 spot anymore, but we're going to see. I would expect a lot of Siegfried mains to be jumping ship from him and experimenting with other of the Shoto-style characters, namely Percival. But we'll see if there's any true Siegfried loyalists out there.